Hello and good day to you. This is Tracy Harrison from the School of Applied Functional Medicine, inviting all progressive healthcare practitioners to come over and hang out with me for a bit today because we're going to dive into the pool and talk about the simple and powerful but often overlooked therapeutic potential of food. Yes, food, something we all ingest. I want to talk about this because especially in the current global environment, so much of our attention is focused on novel science and novel viruses and novel interventions. And that is a wonderful progression of scientific inquiry. But especially in times like today, I find that we tend to overlook, forget, set aside the power of food, the foundational power of food, and that so much of our propensity for sustained illness or sustained wellness hinges on what we're actually putting in our mouths. I want to start right away by talking about some of the challenges, even here on the leading edge of progressive healthcare and integrative medicine and holistic medicine. We can really fall into some mud puddles, some pitfalls together, and lose sight of, again, the common power of foods. I think all of us as practitioners can end up agreeing, of course, food is powerful, right? Diet matters. It's so important. But yet when the rubber hits the road in our clinical practice, it's amazing how little time we actually spend educating, inspiring, and empowering our patients and clients to eat different things, to actually teach them how to find and afford and prepare and savor and introduce to their family foods that will dramatically improve the functioning in their body, both because they're putting more nutrients in their body and they're putting less crap into their body. But often we might agree intellectually or collegially or professionally that this is a good idea. But yet in our practice, we spend so much more time talking perhaps about the more esoteric aspects of functional medicine, where we're much more interested in maybe the leading edge super novel supplement or a brand new interesting test, right? Something on the edge of technology. But we need to remember that as our learning about more fascinating esoteric trees, we're up close staring at this leading edge of science, we must be able to keep beginner's mind and take a step back and see the forest, see the foundational, fundamental aspects of health. The reality is that the comprehensive application of functional medicine science and principles must include education, inspiration, support, resources, and community around how to eat differently. The unhealthy default reality, unfortunately, is not about eating real, whole, nutrient-dense foods. Today, especially here in the United States and the modern Western world, our food is hybridized, genetically modified, sprayed, processed, irradiated, refined, homogenized, stripped, bleached, charred, and served with fries, right? And what we end up with is something that's palatable, something that delivers calories, that delivers macro nutrients, perhaps, lots of calories, but not necessarily a lot of nutrients. And this is where we can struggle in order to bring into the body the nutrients that are needed to actually run our biochemistry. And many of the people that we serve in our practices don't necessarily understand that just because you can put it in your mouth and it tastes good and you don't freak out and have some kind of attack when you swallow it does not mean that it's safe to consume or health promoting to consume. As Michael Pollan has put it so well and so succinctly over the years, edible food-like substances are not necessarily giving us the nutrition that we need. And this is not something that our patients and clients necessarily know and understand how to practically apply in their day-to-day lives. Of course, it shouldn't surprise us that once we modify our foods in so many different ways, we strip it all down in the ways I just mentioned, but then we add a lot of chemicals. If you take a look at popular modern refined foods, there's a lot of calories and a lot of chemicals and a lot of colors, a lot of marketing. But there's artificial sweeteners, artificial colors, artificial flavors, artificial preservatives, artificial texturizing agents. And we laden our foods with substances, largely artificial or highly refined substances that our body's immune systems have not been evolving for millennia to really see as food. And we shouldn't wonder that the different dendritic cells, right? The antigen presenting cells down in our guts, which is where over 2/3 of our immune system lies. It shouldn't surprise us that our immune systems can get confused about what's a food and what's a foreign invader, right? I like to use simple stories and analogies for sharing therapeutic tools with our practitioners, because your patients and clients need to understand these concepts in a way that they can readily understand, leaving all of the medicalese and long acronyms behind. But you can imagine, two dendritic cells down in the small intestines watching the food come in. You're having a snack and Bob and Fred are kind of standing here looking at the food coming down the intestines, and Bob's like, dude, Fred, what is that? Is that a food? What are we eating now? I can't actually tell. Is that a food or is it a chemical? Is that a foreign invader? Like, are we supposed to react or are we supposed to tolerate that? I don't know if I'm being fed or attacked. And of course, depending on how hypervigilant their immune system is or isn't, depending on other things, like their stress level, like the level of toxicity in their body, in particular, the level of toxic personal hygiene products that they're slathering on their skin, right? Because the skin is a big mouth. We shouldn't put anything on our skin that we're not willing to eat from a toxic viewpoint. But insufficient zinc, there's all sorts of things that we do that predisposes for a hypervigilant immune system that makes it more likely that our immune system is going to react in a pro-inflammatory way in response to these foods that we can consume. In some cases, because the foods literally are coated in or mixed with or blended with a known recognized toxin. And the immune system's not confused at all, right? It's actually doing what it's designed to do, which is to target the foreign substance. But so often we have hypervigilant immune systems, and it's a good reminder that food is not just fuel. Calories. It's not just macronutrients. And my goodness, we spend so much time in the holistic healthcare world arguing about macronutrients. My goodness, what's the right ratio of carbs and protein and fats? What's the perfect ratio? And a lot of infighting and argument about, oh, well, if you eat a ketogenic diet and think that's good for you, it's just because you haven't figured it out yet. Or if you eat a vegan diet and you think that's good for you, it's just because you haven't figured it out yet, right? That we spend a lot of time with infighting and forgetting the truth that there's bioindividuality. And some people feel fantastic and thrive on a ketogenic diet. They feel vibrant and energetic and they lose weight for the first time. Other people get exhausted eating that way. It is not their imagination, it's their truth. On the other hand, other individuals don't find relief from chronic inflammatory disease symptoms until they leave that behind and eat maybe a low-fat vegan diet. And it's their truth that when they change their diet over their unique body, their unique life system, which is not just about their genetics. Oh, by the way, it's also about the planetary level diversity and population of microbial friends in their gut, right? They are designed to thrive. You and I can both eat whole, largely unrefined, nutrient-dense diets and thrive with radically different macronutrient profiles. We need to honor that truth in people, and also as practitioners, we need to be very cautious to not push our own bioindividuality, what we've learned about our unique diet. Don't push that on your patients and clients. It may not be what serves them. One of the greatest skills we have to remember as practitioners is when to be quiet and listen and be an objective participant and partner with your patient or client and understanding how they feel when they consume foods? What is their unique body asking for? Which may be very different from what helps you to thrive. But food is not just calories, it's not even just macronutrients, but for that matter, it's not even just micronutrients. Although I want to talk about this for a minute because I find even the most savvy practitioners lose track of the fact that biochemistry in the body requires nutrients. One of the things I'm most famous for saying is that we don't have a pantry of nutrients like in the kitchen. We just go to and open the cabinet and go for a little more nutrients, right? We don't have one of those in our left butt cheek where we just go to get a little extra zinc or a little extra vitamin A or a little extra glycine if we've been choosing to eat crap food for the past few weeks. If you don't eat it, my friends, we go deficient and biochemistry stops working as well. This is a fact, but we can lose sight of this. And it should be expected that if we're eating a crap food diet, biochemical processes start to work more sluggishly. And we need nutrients, right? Whether it's needing things like vitamin B6, not just B12, not just folate or B9, but vitamin B6 in order to methylate optimally, in order to make glutathione. We need nutrients. We need iron and zinc in order to convert T4 to T3 thyroid hormone. If you don't have optimal levels, if you're eating a crap food diet, your levels are going to get progressively lower and lower, right? If you have diarrhea, they go lower faster. If you eat a particularly crap food diet, they go lower faster. If you have heavy menstrual cycles, you're losing nutrients and that blood loss. The levels go down more quickly, right? So micronutrients are required to run biochemistry. But even beyond that, I want to talk about the most neglected category of food, which is about phytonutrients. And this is a good reminder that if I just pick up and go to eat your simple, everyday, fresh apple, if I were to count the vitamins and minerals that are in it, I would probably come up with about the same amount that you would find in a multivitamin, right? Maybe about 15. But when you actually count up all of the known nutrients that are in an apple, it's over 400. This is a very powerful truth we need to come back to, that food and supplements, my friends, are not the same, right? You are never going to get the same nutrient density in eating these super refined nutrient stripped foods, or thinking, which a lot of people do, by the way, a lot of people who are sort of orchestrating what they may feel is the perfect diet. And I have plenty of family members and friends who want to do this. You know, I want to eat my sort of crap food diet that I really love of refined foods, but then I'm going to take a whole ton of supplements and make up for it. We have to teach people that this is not mathematically true. There is nutrient density in phytonutrients, right? These are largely natural substances. In particular, this is things like, polyphenols and flavonoids, things that actually contribute to plants' survival in the wild, things that help the plants to survive drought and excess heat and different types of growth and mold and predators in the wild. And so when we eat these foods, we benefit from the defense systems of the plants. When we consume animal foods and the animals have eaten those plant foods for their own nourishment, we benefit from that through concentration up the food chain. But we need these phytonutrients. And one thing that functional medicine has very powerfully helped to highlight in the past 10 to 15 years is how specific phytonutrients stimulate specific enzyme pathways in the body that support greater resilient health. I think the best example of that I can think of is activating a powerful pathway called NRF2, which when it is stimulated helps to upregulate the synthesis of glutathione, our most important intracellular antioxidant. And when we are making so many different modern, especially Western lifestyle choices that are promoting a high pro-oxidant environment, we need to remember that when we have chronic simmering inflammatory dynamics in our bodies because of our lifestyle choices, inflammation wreaks havoc on the body largely through the buildup of oxidative stress, which eventually causes oxidative damage to tissue. And damage internal to the body, what does that attract? Repair, which is inflammation. Our immune system acting to try and heal that damaged tissue. And so inflammation begets more oxidative damage, begets more oxidative stress, begets more inflammation, and so on and so on. And this is how there's a continuous downward spiral of dis-ease from things like insulin resistance or a hypervigilant immune system or chronic unremitting stress, which creates immunosuppression and allows us to have chronic simmering infectious dynamics where the immune system is strong enough to contain an infection, but not strong enough to eradicate it. And so this is where phytonutrients are so key. When we do things like consume good, regular, daily amounts of a diversity of cruciferous vegetables, we are getting phytonutrients that help to stimulate the body naturally to have stronger antioxidant defenses. And contrary to common myth, by the way, the mechanism via which these phytonutrients stimulate that is highly diverse. And indeed, some of these phytonutrients are overtly antioxidant. But you might be surprised to learn that the pathway via which most of these nutrients stimulate our bodies to be more resilient and to have more sustainable health is actually via hormesis, where the phytonutrients themselves are actually pro-oxidant, and they put just enough challenge on the body to stimulate a response. Just like exercise is basically controlled damage to the body, right? Exercise has a hormetic effect where we do just enough oxidative wear and tear, tearing of muscle fibers and this type of thing. We fatigue our muscles in a way that stimulates their growth and healing and restoration. This is a hormetic effect, and it's a good reminder that this is why healthy challenge, whether it's intellectual challenge or physical challenge, or yes, nutrient challenge, by getting phytonutrients in your body, being exposed to the natural world and the microbes and the soil and plants, this is health promoting largely via hormetic effects. And so that very small amounts of pro-oxidizing substances have a health promoting effect by stimulating our own endogenous antioxidant systems. A really powerful way to educate your patients and clients beyond the sort of lip speak of, oh, vegetables are good for you. That's not really inspiring to anyone, right? When you're stressed and you're looking for comforting, something that's quote unquote good for you is not very motivating to anyone. Education, inspiration, and empowerment are really essential for helping the people you serve to make different choices. And so teaching them that an apple with over 400 nutrients or a stalk of broccoli with over 600 nutrients is not replaceable with any type of refined substance. And this is where we must eat food. But I also think it's really essential to educate the people we serve that in our modern, oh so toxic, oh so stressful lifestyle choices, that it can be very hard to get all of the nutrition that we need just from food alone. Certainly if people live really healthy lifestyles and they don't have a lot of toxic exposure and they have excellent mindfulness practices and they don't deal with excessive stress, and if they have a lot of wildcrafted and organic, maybe they do their own gardening, really, really nutrient dense foods, then they may do quite well. But the average person we serve, again, especially here in the modern Western world, and perhaps especially in the US, people can really benefit from supplemental nutrients, not instead of food, not instead of a nutrient-dense whole food, but in addition to. It's the icing on the cake, right? In order to help move people from barely having sufficiency of nutrients to having optimal levels of nutrition, right? Going from maybe feeling fine to accelerating health promoting biochemistry so people can feel fantastic. And this is because we have so much toxic challenge to our body's biochemistry from chemicals, which we inhale and swallow and slather on our skins. We have unprecedented toxic burdens in our lifestyles today. We also have unprecedented stress. And this is not just mental, emotional stress that's fueled by go do, achieve more, measure up to your peers, the sort of self-image decimating effects, especially in youth, of being exposed to social media messages all the time. This is really stressful. But even beyond mental, emotional stress, biochemical stress, physiological stress, physical stress, all of these increase stress hormones in the body. And when we are highly stressed, we need to remember that in a sympathetic dominant nervous system mode, the body purposefully deprioritizes certain physiology. When we're super stressed, we have reduced digestion on purpose. We have reduced immune function, right? Especially innate and intracellular immune function on purpose. We have less detoxification capability on purpose. Because when the body believes it has to fight, flight, and hide to survive till tomorrow, to even worry about these things, it deprioritizes certain muscle contractions, certain glandular secretions, certain neurotransmitter synthesis and transmission. We have different physiological response if we're fighting, flighting, and hiding than if we're resting, digesting, healing, and making babies, right? And many of the people we serve are living in a sympathetic dominant nervous system mode. So not just about calories, not just about macronutrients. We can argue about those all day. Not even just about micronutrients, but about phytonutrients and about the information that food is conveying about the status of your world. Because in the intestines, our immune system, all antigen presenting cells, especially dendritic cells, are constantly, literally taking a bite out of things that we eat and serving it up for assessment via other immune cells with an opinion about it. So you can imagine the difference in what type of priming our immune system is getting if we are consuming largely crap food, right? These highly refined, stripped, processed foods that are coated in chemicals, and Bob and Fred can't tell, is that a food or a foreign invader? Oh my gosh, it's logical that our immune system becomes hyper-vigilant, as opposed to if Bob and Fred are seeing much more often pure, whole nutrients that human physiology has evolved to expect and thrive in consuming throughout our evolution. The other thing that I think is a good reason why we need to honor that food first, but boosted with the power of supplementation, targeted supplementation for individual specific needs, which is something we're very passionate about, is because, unfortunately, my friends, food is way less nutrient dense than it used to be. I would like to tell you that a stalk of broccoli today is as nutrient dense as broccoli was 300 years ago. But I have news for you. The truth is, and this has actually been readily studied, a stalk of broccoli isn't anywhere near as nutritious as it even was 50 years ago. There have been assessments done even back in the 1970s, in my lifetime, and looking at the drop in bioavailable nutrition within foods. And I'm talking about whole natural foods. And part of this is because we have a global issue with topsoil erosion. We carry out excessive high profitability farming on the same old square mile of farmland without putting back any type of natural fertilizer, especially that would replenish the soil for minerals. A lot of vitamins come from the sun, right, through natural growth patterns. But minerals, minerals are rocks. Minerals come from the soil. And if the minerals aren't in the soil, it's not going to come up through the roots and get into the plant. And so we have less available nutrition to get into our foods today. But also, again, through modern high profitability agriculture, and especially industrial farming, we're increasingly getting more and more narrow in our crop seed selection. We're much more likely to select particular varietals of foods for what? High yield, profitability, ease of growing, maybe drought resistance. We don't choose various varieties, even traditional heirloom varieties, not even hybridized varieties. We don't choose them based on nutrient density, right? We're choosing them based on economic and practical agricultural factors. And so a lot of the varietals that are pervasive in our agricultural supply today is not those incredibly rich, nutrient-dense heirloom varieties. It's these modern, way cheaper to grow, makes a much bigger, fatter, heavier fruit or vegetable that maybe has more calories, maybe weighs more, brings in more profit, but it's not more nutrient dense. And so a stalk of broccoli is not a stalk of broccoli is not a stalk of broccoli. Now, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't eat broccoli and embrace it, right? A great example of a cruciferous vegetable. But again, where foods are not as nutritious. And so this is where it can become particularly important to do a deep dive and to understand, based on a person's unique life system, where are we missing key nutrients that their unique biochemistry is wrestling with in order to not just feel fine, but to thrive and actually achieve optimal, resilient health that naturally repels disease in the face of all sorts of life challenges, including infectious challenges of all kinds. And this is something that the SARS-CoV-2 epidemic has helped us to understand, because viruses spread. That's what they do, right? We have massive transmission of the virus. But whether or not people are experiencing symptomatic disease at all, much less severe symptomatic disease, or even terribly very life-threatening or even fatal life circumstances, is about the challenge of the virus in the face of the body's resiliency, right? What is the antioxidant status? What is the inflammation status? What is the sufficiency of B vitamins, of tryptophan, of glutathione, of methylation, of superoxide dismutase, of innate immune function, optimal melatonin synthesis, optimal GABA and glutamate balance? All of these things inform our body's ability to aggressively have a successful encounter with a viral challenge on the day-to-day battlefield in the natural world. And this is why we're seeing, unfortunately, way higher predisposition for severe disease of COVID-19, with a number of common epidemic comorbidities like type 2 diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and asthma. And so this is where we can build resilient health by using optimal nutrition to boost these pathways. But I want to talk more about some of the pitfalls and some additional pearls with regard to specific foods. First of all, I think it's really critical that we be consuming food that supports our microbial friends. After all, they present hundreds of times more genetic material than our human cells do, and that is having a massive impact on our downstream human functioning, to the point where you might actually think, who's the host, given their massive impact on regulation of our biochemistry, in particular our immune function. But we thrive with a populous, diverse microbiome. Obviously, we want to avoid at all costs, whenever possible, avoid the use of antibiotics, which not only decimates potentially pathogenic microbes, but of course, the majority of the commensal, facultative, supportive ones. In a good, healthy, diverse microbiome, we have tiny amounts of really virulent pathogenic species that our healthy immune system is keeping balanced, right? We like to talk about the diversity of kids on the playground, right? And in a good, diverse playground, you have a few bullies, it's just part of the diversity in kids. But we want to keep the bullies under control. We want to keep them in commensal balance with other species. And we need to eat a good, whole nutrient dense diet, especially a rich diversity of phytonutrients in order to optimally feed our microbiome. And when I talk about phytonutrients, one of the easiest things that a lot of our children, teens tend to know, but adults, they don't remember the education from kindergarten or first grade. There's a reason we need to eat from the rainbow, right? Because different phytonutrient categories present as different colors in plant foods. And so you tend to get, certainly they overlap, but a different mix of phytonutrients in yellow plant foods versus green ones, versus purple or blue ones, versus red ones. And so eating a diversity of foods actually matters. That's not just good guidance, that's good biochemical truth. And so being able to make a diversity of choices is important. We also need fiber, right? Studies show, actually really powerful studies with animals, that depending on the level of fiber that is consumed, the thickness and the integrity of the protective mucosal lining in the intestines is thicker or thinner. And this mucosal lining is where we house our immune function. It's where we have resilient absorption of nutrients or not. It's where we produce brush border enzymes or not. So we want to fuel our microbiome for secreting all sorts of short chain fatty acids that help to feed the enterocytes in our intestines. This is part of the symbiotic thriving that we have with our microbial friends. And so fiber, both soluble and insoluble, a mixture of them, is overtly health promoting for our microbiome and also for our intestinal lining. It can also serve us to eat fermented and cultured foods in terms of being able to bring in transient additional microbes that help to further prime our immune systems. This is a good example of traditional foods that our ancestors used to eat all the time, because a long time ago, before refrigeration, certainly before all sorts of food processing equipment, but before you had a refrigerator, before you had a microwave, right? There weren't that many ways in which you could preserve foods. You would either culture it or you would salt it. Those were your two options for being able to preserve food for consuming more than a day or two later. And so traditionally, our microbiomes, our physiology, our genetics has evolved with a copious intake of cultured foods, right? For that matter, we also ate a lot more dirt. We didn't have scrubby pads and all sorts of solutions we dunk foods in to kill all the microbes and to scrub every little speck of dirt off of things. Dirt is good for you, right? I remember the look of horror one time when I was doing a cooking class and I was explaining to my students that I would buy organic produce unless there was an obvious bug or clump of mud on plant foods. I may rinse it, but otherwise I would let there be this residual amount of dirt on the foods and let it bring into my body the other trace minerals, the other commensal environmental microbes with it. Again, as a way of keeping my immune system primed and tolerant of the natural world, so that my immune system is appropriately tolerant and reacting only to true threats to my immune system and not becoming hyperreactive to things that it should be tolerating. Plants, animals, foods, self, right? We want to keep a primed immune system. Fiber, colors, fermented, cultured food, these are things that can really help to nurture an appropriately tolerant and balanced immune system, and also a nice, rich, diverse, populous microbiome. I want to talk a little bit about cravings. And the first thing I want to talk about is something that I imagine most of you are aware of, but it can be really powerful to explain to your patients that when they struggle with addictions to things like chips or cookies or pizza, right? Even the marketing slogans, no one can eat just one, Bet you can't not eat this. You know, you got to get a big bucket or a big bag, right? It's crazy to me when an individual serving of chips is this big giant package of chips, right? And how quickly people fall prey to the label, you know, single serving. It could be this big, but because it says single serving on the label, we're very vulnerable to marketing. But the reality is, starting about 30 years ago, we have a very real flavor engineering industry. This is a known science. There are particular combinations of fat, sugar, and salt that do not occur in food naturally, in the natural world at all. But you can engineer precise ratios of fat, sugar, and salt in foods that will optimally trigger a release of dopamine. And if you make them spicy, by the way, especially if it's really spicy, you're going to get a release of endorphins, which is part of how the body responds to the spicy, which it sees as a source of pain, right? The hot on the tongue, you get a little hit of endorphins, which is why one of the reasons people can crave spicy food, by the way, because endorphins are feel good, and you know, they kind of give you a little bit of pain relief and relax you a little bit. No extreme exercise or opiates required, right? But people can become yes, the Dorito effect, exactly. Cool Ranch Doritos are maybe the best example I can think of an addictive food, but pizza does this too, my friends. So we have to teach people, and rather than having it be a don't eat this, don't do that, scolding parental authoritative type of approach, I have found great results with helping people to understand that the flavor engineers, the marketing for these massive multinational companies are counting on people being a sucker. They are counting on people being basically mindless and vulnerable and throwing money at getting sort of a drug hit from their foods. And that with better information, inspiration, and empowerment, they don't need to fall prey to this marketing and this flavor engineering. And in this way, we can start to sort of rile up people's empowerment, people's desire to not be taken advantage of. But this is about flavor combinations that don't occur in nature. And of course, we have to teach people how to begin where they are and make progressive change. There's great books about this, by the way, including, I think one of them is called How the Food Giants Duped Us. But it's a whole book about flavor engineering. It can be a really powerful wake-up call. It's also a great session to include in a group program with your patients about making different food choices and promoting health through different food choices. So it's really critical that we understand this. The reality is that individuals who have lower levels of serotonin function, maybe that's reduced synthesis of it because of something like insufficiency of vitamin B6, which is common in women who use birth control pills, by the way, or individuals who use any type of serotonin reuptake inhibiting drug, which naturally can drive serotonin down. People who may have genetic issues with regard to serotonin receptor function or other mechanisms of activating serotonin action. Well, one of the things that serotonin does is it helps to regulate appetite and impulse control. Addictions of all types are more likely to occur they're not universal, of course, because people also have behavioral choices and other mindset issues with regard to preventing addiction. But you want to look for issues with regard to serotonin function in people who have food addictions, whether it's sweets or alcohol or drugs or pornography, gambling, all of these things, right? Or there issues with serotonin, optimal serotonin function. We also see this in research related to eating disorders, by the way, because there's a dysregulation in impulse control. The other thing to think about that I just want to bounce off here with regard to cravings, sugar cravings. Research clearly shows that the more you eat, the more you want. And the more you want, the more you eat. And the more you eat, the more you want. And so when you're working with someone in order to help them to reduce their intake of refined carbohydrates or sugars or sweeteners, it is so important to set expectations. We live in a world where you can pop a pill and pain goes away in about 20 minutes. So most people believe that improvements Okay, well, if it doesn't happen in 2 hours, surely it won't take more than a couple of days, or even on the outside, 2 weeks? Surely everything's supposed to be better in 2 weeks, right? It's really important to explain to people, for example, how long it can take when you're changing your diet for your taste buds to adjust. In my experience, it takes about 2 months for the average person to be able to comfortably step away from addictions to sweetened foods. And especially if they're using a lot. It's incredible the number of people who put not just one, but 4 or 7 or 10 packages of artificial sweetener into a coffee or into a bowl of hot cereal, right? They have trained their taste buds to expect foods to be over the top sweet, or they literally can't palate them. And so there is a withdrawal process. There is an actual change physically in our taste buds, and certainly from an expectation viewpoint. And it takes about 2 months of commitment and just expecting food to not taste as good as that progression is made. The super cool thing is that once people get used to it, then simple everyday things like a sweet potato with nothing on it tastes over the top sweet. Things like a baked apple is incredibly rich and savory and satisfying, right? I have taught clients for years and years that, when you're really craving something, even if you want that salt, sugar, fat hit, you can put a teaspoon of coconut oil in a pot and put a cup of berries and cook the berries just for about 5 or 7 minutes, not to where it becomes like jelly, but just into where there's a slight reduction of the fruits, and put just a little dash of salt and then like a teaspoon of vanilla, maybe a little shake of cinnamon, and to enjoy that as a dessert, right? It's fruit and coconut oil and some spices, right? I can't tell you the number of people, if you will work with them step by step to give them suggestions based on what they love, they can find a way to have alternatives on a day-over-day basis that they adapt. Well, initially they adopt them, and then they adapt over time as their taste buds adjust to embracing as their new dessert. We have to make sure that the way we're teaching about food is not about deprivation, you just should eat healthy stuff. It's okay if it doesn't taste great, and do the right thing, eat healthy stuff. Oh my gosh, how boring is that, right? People don't want to eat food that tastes like cardboard, right? They want to do what they enjoy. People want pleasure out of food. And especially in our stress-riddled lives where we deprive ourselves of so much of what we want, right? We deprive ourselves of hugs and kisses and good sex and days off and hot tubs and long soaks and massages and laughter and funny movies and doing adventurous, challenging, naughty things. We deprive ourselves of that. So yeah, we want Doritos because it's an easy way out, right? I remember teaching a weight loss class many years ago, and how much it resonated with people when I said, one of the reasons why we look to food to satisfy not just our hunger, not just our need for nutrients, but we're looking for food to fill those holes, that are not food deficiencies, right? They're pleasure deficiencies. They are adventure deficiencies. They are decadence deficiencies. They are love deficiencies, right? And you health coaches out there, right? I'm sure you talk a lot about primary food, right? The things we most crave and need to thrive, which are not edible. Because they're things like love and nurturing and adventure and challenge and acceptance. All of these things that we don't give ourselves. And then we're looking for food to be the perfect lover. And it shows up, right? Food, it looks good, it smells good, it tastes good. It's always there for you at 6 p.m. or 2 in the morning. It's always ready to get it on with you whenever you want it, right? It doesn't talk back. It doesn't criticize you. It doesn't have bad breath, right? Food is available. It's the lover that a lot of people settle for because they're not giving themselves the lover they most want, which is themselves. right? And food is a readily available, albeit a cheap, it is a readily available substitute. And good comprehensive health care needs to provide people with some access to these concepts and some exploration. And I appreciate some of you have a clinical practice setup where you can readily do this with people. Others of you don't. But this is where you can offer group programs or workshops, evening sessions and discussion groups, right? Where people can explore these concepts, or even online communities that can talk about these kinds of things. Because through the functional medicine lens, and especially here at SAFM, it's not just about teaching practitioners about science or even about the devil in the detail clinical know-how, right? We want to help you transform the lives of the people that you're serving. And unless you help them to not just get well, but to stay well, by taking back ownership of their health and changing their habits in a way they can sustain. And nothing is sustainable unless it's enjoyable. Right? People don't sustain painful, arduous, boring things. Nobody does that. I don't do that. Do you do that? I hope not, right? That doesn't sound very fun. We have to help people to find and adopt and then adapt to and learn to savor things that uplift them and to satisfy the real true nature of their cravings. There's other reasons why people may have cravings, right? Chocolate. Oh my goodness, people, women in particular, but people can crave chocolate for a lot of reasons. Sometimes we crave a food because it's particularly rich in a nutrient that we need. And yes, it is true that people will crave chocolate when they are mineral deficient, in particular when they need more magnesium. But I'm going to tell you a surprising reason for that. Chocolate has a good amount of magnesium in it, a lot more than other foods, but it's not even close to the most magnesium-rich food. One of the reasons we crave chocolate is because we get that hit of magnesium. But the particular flavonoids that are present in chocolate have been shown to increase our stress resiliency. When you eat chocolate, your adrenaline comes down when you have a stressful encounter. Your cortisol level comes down. Right? So it makes you more resilient. So chocolate, even with its theobromine, which is a stimulant, which kind of wakes up your brain and makes you feel perky, you're also getting a combo hit of magnesium and some stress hormone reducing flavonoids, right? Flavonoids, great example of phytonutrients, right? People can crave salt. Typical table salt, yes, because maybe they have low sodium, in particular if they're using diuretic drugs or if they have a hypoadrenal stress axis, right, where their cortisol level is too low, which means their aldosterone is too low, so they lose too much sodium and water through their urine. So yes, you crave salt, but we can crave salt when we have all sorts of other mineral deficiencies. In fact, it's interesting, when we normalize our sodium intake, we have increased absorption of calcium from the GI tract by actually changing the regulation of parathyroid hormone. And so this is where people may crave salt because they need more calcium, right? Where the body in its wisdom knows what it needs in order to boost intake, and helping people to find whole, natural, nutrient-dense versions of their cravings and being resourceful in order to help them to do that. People can crave ice cream, right, when they have been depriving themselves of fats, essential fats in their diet, right? What better way to crave fats than along with a little bit of sugar? People may crave shellfish, especially oysters, if they are deficient in copper and zinc. Actually, no food more nutrient dense for copper and zinc than oysters. May crave meat in general when they're looking for iron and vitamin B12, especially when consuming a vegetarian or a vegan diet. Again, we may actually crave hyperpalatable processed junk foods because we have a deficiency of relaxation. Because we're looking for that dopamine hit, right? Because we have too much scattered thinking. We're stretched. We're burning the candle at both ends. And we're looking for a dopamine hit in order to provide more focus. But it's also true that when our taste buds, our sense of smell and our sense of taste become dulled, it can be a sign of zinc deficiency, which has a huge impact on both of those senses. And so we're more likely to crave hyper palatable engineered foods or even super spicy foods because our taste buds in general have become dulled and we're looking for something more exciting, right? I want to talk a little bit about digestion and absorption. The old adage of you are what you eat is not true. Not true. Woefully inadequate. You are what you eat, digest, absorb, convert to final forms, and get past the cell membrane, which is a much higher bar than just what you eat. And, you know, the best guidance for improving digestion is not even a food substance, and it's not a supplement. It's a behavior, which is eating hygiene. You know, most of us have lost sight of the fact that digestion and absorption of nutrients is a parasympathetic activity, which means that when we're going and rushing and oh my God, I'm in a hurry and I don't have time and, you know, let me just cram food in my mouth and then, whoa, I have indigestion. Of course you do. It's a perfectly logical outcome from trying to do a parasympathetic activity while in a sympathetic nervous system activation. Because digestive secretions, GI motility, all of these are downregulated not by a little bit, but by a lot. 20, 30, 40, 50%. And so just because you chew up and swallow the food does not mean the nutrients are getting internal to the body. We may be ending up with some pretty expensive bowel movements, right? But when people end up with IBS types of systems, yes, sometimes that's a microbial overgrowth. Sometimes it's a food sensitivity. Sometimes it's just really crappy eating hygiene. And people need education from you around, just slow down. If you're in that big of a hurry, postpone eating. Postpone eating until you can sit down and take a couple of minutes to breathe. Do some mindful breathing with extended exhalations and a pause between inhales and exhales that actually tells your nervous system that you're not about to die, which actually activates the vagus nerve so that you get optimal digestive secretions, right? We want people to slow down, to chew. Chewing. Talk about a non-sexy concept, but it's the only part of digestion and absorption of nutrients that you can actually control. Otherwise, the rest of that process has to deal with what we did or didn't do in our mouths. Most people chew a piece of food just 2 or 3 times until they can gulp it down, or even worse, chase it down with way too much liquid to try and force it down. If you chew food thoroughly until it's, you know, a very liquidy type of slurry, you don't need to drink a lot of liquids with your food, right? Because you've naturally liberated the liquid internal to the food and you've mixed it with a lot of saliva for ease of lubrication and movement. Eating hygiene is really potent physiological medicine, right? In terms of being able to get more nutrition from your food, being able to minimize gastrointestinal distress, and being able to maximize the nutrients that you actually bring on board. Let's talk about key food gotchas, right? We teach at SAFM that because enhanced intestinal permeability is one of the 4 legs of the classic autoimmune stool, right, that holds up the strength of an autoimmune, a chronic autoimmune dynamic. One of those is enhanced intestinal permeability. And certain individuals have a genetic or a lifestyle primed predisposition to a lack of tight junctions between the villi and their small intestines, and having basically too big of holes in the colander, right, that separates the intestinal lumen, the inside of the intestines, from the systemic body. And when our tight junctions become more porous, our immune system, and in many cases our systemic body, gets overexposed to the crazy pro-inflammatory dynamics that are happening inside the intestines all day, every day. And certain foods can trigger this. We know gluten, and all foods that contain gluten is the #1 culprit for that. And especially when autoimmune diseases run in the family. Not the same autoimmune disease, but the prevalence of autoimmune diseases, period. Different types, right? Because they're all just different flavors of immune disease, immune system dysregulation. But eliminating gluten, not a little bit, not 99%, 100% cold turkey, is really important for ensuring that we shut the gate that is triggering systemic inflammation by exposing the systemic body to what's happening in the gut. And we teach not just eliminating gluten, but in the right timing and the right order for a given individual based on what they can achieve, eliminating gluten, dairy, and all grains, even gluten-free grains, because there's strong evidence of cross-reactive potentiation of leaky gut, not just from gluten, but from foods that molecularly look a little too much like gluten. And dairy and all other grains are the common culprits. There are some other potentials like coffee, unfortunately, but the most common ones are other grains and dairy. And so it's one of the first lifestyle changes that we recommend when people are trying to address the triggering mediating factors for chronic autoimmune disease in order to stop the downward cycle of chronic inflammation. In terms of kidney stones, right? People who have recurring kidney stones, make sure that they're not consuming black tea, which has a huge level of oxalates that can easily contribute to the regular formation of calcium oxalate stones, which is the most common type of kidney stone. One of the things people can do to really help prevent that is to consume fresh lemon juice, right? The juice of a couple of fresh lemons every day. The natural citrate that comes into that helps to break down oxalate in the body. And individuals who have had a cholecystectomy are more vulnerable downstream to the formation of kidney stones. So just a piece of interconnectedness there to look for. Histamine intolerance, right? People who struggle with chronic headache or migraine, and improving hydration and boosting magnesium is not helping. Think about whether or not they have histamine intolerance, maybe a histamine overload, right? In order to break down histamine, we need two different biochemical processes. One is an enzyme in the gut called diamine oxidase, which is produced in the brush border. So if people have wear and tear on that intestinal lining, they may not produce optimal levels of diamine oxidase. And then internal to the body, when we're producing histamine as a defensive response from our immune system, the pathway that breaks that down is a methylation pathway. And so it needs things like key B vitamins. But when people are struggling with chronic headache or nasal respiratory congestion, postnasal drip, these types of things, we want to be careful of the fact that some perfectly healthy foods may be promoting histamine overload. And this is where any and all cultured and fermented foods should really be removed, right? All cultured and fermented foods, regardless of the type, these individuals usually thrive by eating fresher prepared foods and not eating leftovers. Alcohol, when you think about fermented foods, remember wine, vinegar, anything made with yeast, right? These are foods that are likely going to boost histamine further in these individuals. And just addressing these categories of foods and also dairy foods, which are very histamine producing, people can get a tremendous amount of relief. And again, it's a great reminder of bioindividuality and that nice fermented cultured foods, kimchi, right, can be perfectly health promoting for one person, but really dis-ease promoting for someone else. But I want to end today with two final pearls. And these are the biggest mistakes and missteps that I have seen over the decade of educating thousands and thousands of healthcare practitioners. The two biggest missteps that I see made. The first one is we have to meet people where they are. If a person is eating a donut today for breakfast, they're going to some fast food joint and eating a hamburger, fries, and a soda for lunch, and then they're doing some fast casual or quick prep, refined, macaroni out of a box, highly prepared food for dinner. It's a lot of crap food, right? You cannot expect them to make sustainable change by jumping from that to, making broccoli and salmon and quinoa at home, cooking. That's crazy. It's too big of a jump. And if we make improving diet too hard, too fast, too overwhelming in the beginning, it does not matter how right you are. It does not matter how scientifically anchored and correct your guidance is. If people walk away because what you recommend is too hard, realistically, our knowledge doesn't really matter at all because we aren't helping people. So we have to meet people where they are and help them to make progressive step-by-step change, which is about building on the strength of where they are. If they like to go out to eat to a restaurant that generally serves, pretty crappy, maybe crap oils, a lot of refined grain, carbohydrate types of foods, okay, great. Look at the menu with them. Help them to find the best options on that menu. Don't tell them not to go there. They go there with their family. They love it. It's a ritual. Otherwise, their whole family is going to be up in arms about, we want to go there. If you want to eat healthy food, stay home and do it by yourself, right? We have to help make things sustainable. And so look at the menu. Right? Look at the sides menu. There's some really healthy stuff. Lots of times there's like clean protein options. There's individual vegetable dish. There's side salads. There's things people can order from a sides menu. Even at a restaurant that, maybe it wouldn't be our top recommendation, but it's where people are. We have to recommend step-by-step change because the reality is if we want to help people not just get well, but stay well. People have to make dietary change that involves foods that they can find, that they can afford, that they know how to prepare, that they actually savor, palate it and savor it, and that they can find some kind of community in enjoying it, meaning they're not the only person in the world who eats that in their world, and so they feel like too much of a deviant, too much of an outcast, ostracized, criticized. What the heck are you eating? What is that, right? People need tools and resources and support. And this is a fabulous time to engage with people in group programs and workshops and online platforms. Offer grocery store tours, offer cooking classes. You can do some of these things virtually as well. Help to bring people ideas and resources, education, sharing successes, sharing practical tips. Get some discussion, paired share, group share going. You can do that in person. You can do it on Zoom as well, right? Get people sharing ideas. It's not just about giving them guidance that's scientifically evidence-based. We have to educate, inspire, empower, and bring community to people to help them to adopt sustainable lifestyle changes for the long haul. So we must begin where we are. And sometimes where they're beginning is a long, long way from what we think is optimal. And there are a lot of people today who don't have the faintest idea how to wash, chop, and steam some vegetables and put a healthy, reasonable seasoning or sauce on it. Right? We have to start there, right? The other thing that I find is a big pitfall that's very much related to this point, but it's distinct, it's different. As I said in the beginning, people fill a lot of holes in their lives with foods, maybe knowingly or unknowingly. And to the extent that the rest of their life is really health promoting and filling their primary food needs, people are more or less dependent on them. But everyone has rituals around food. It's not just about whether they're eating health promoting food or disease promoting food. There is nourishment in how did you acquire the food? Where did you store the food? Who prepared the food? What was going on? What servingware did you use? Right? If you want to help someone cut back on alcohol, great. Have them use the exact same ritual, but put something different in the glass a few days a week, right? So instead of it being a martini, right, or some sort of a cocktail, it can be sparkling water with a fancy ice cube in a pretty glass with maybe a splash of cranberry juice, right, with a garnish, with a pretty napkin. But if their ritual of enjoying happy hour or a nightcap involves a glass and a certain chair and a pet or a beloved or a toasty fire or sitting outside on the deck or watching the stars or watching the sunset, keep the ritual. If we wipe away the rituals of people's lives, we make it very hard for them to embrace change. Keep the ritual part, right? And helping people to adapt that. You know, sometimes people don't like preparing food because they have a crap knife. I can't tell you how many people I've seen trying to chop vegetables with a knife they inherited from their mother 32 years ago that hasn't been sharpened in their entire life. So I wouldn't want to chop with that. It's painful. You're going to cut yourself, right? Buying a brand new knife, right? And getting a sharpener, or taking an old one, an heirloom one, something that means something to someone, and sharpening it. Having a good cutting board. Having a pan that doesn't involve flaking Teflon in the bottom of it, right? Teaching people how to bring their children into the kitchen and giving them tasks to participate in food preparation, right? People need ritual around food that is about the satisfaction that goes beyond the flavor or the fulfillment, the physical fulfillment of bringing on board food. So make sure that in looking at how we might shift the food, how do we preserve what else is special to people around the entire process of nourishing themselves? Because again, people aren't just fueled with calories, or even with macronutrients, or even micronutrients, or even phytonutrients, right? People are fueled by the emotional experiences of life, and that includes the rituals, the precious practices, and the environment in which we enjoy various foods and beverages. So I'm going to stop there and thank you all so much for joining me today. I could keep going on, but I hope this has been inspiring to you about the therapeutic power of food. Not just the what of food, but the when and the how and the who, right, of foods. And that as we learn more about esoteric science and edge of technology, interconnectedness through the functional medicine lens, never ever lose sight of the forest for the trees and the necessity of foundational aspects of health, and food is perhaps the most primal of those. My name is Tracy Harrison, and I want to thank you for joining me. Have a great day, and thank you so much for being part of our progressive healthcare practitioner community.